Do you believe that a single wrong turn by a chauffeur could send more than 20 million lives into oblivion? It sounds like the plot of a deranged science fiction movie, but it is, in fact, the stark and brutal truth that ignited World War I, one of the darkest chapters in human history. It all began with a lone gunshot in Sarajevo. 2 lives fell on. In that instant, the entire planet was dragged into an unstoppable vortex of blood, fire, and destruction. On June 28, 1914, Sarajevo was more vibrant than ever as it welcomed Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary and his wife, Sophie. What they did not know was that, hidden among the cheering crowds, 7 Serbian assassins lay in wait, their hearts burning with hatred. A bomb was hurled toward their open-top car, but fate seemed to mock the plot. The device bounced off and exploded behind the vehicle, leaving the royal couple unharmed. The Archduke had escaped death by a hair's breadth. Yet the true tragedy arrived through a cruel twist of chance. After the ceremony at City Hall, the Archduke decided to visit those wounded in the earlier explosion. On the way, his driver made a wrong turn at an intersection and was forced to stop and reverse. In that fateful pause, they found themselves face to face with Gavrilo Princip's 17-year-old assassin, disheartened by what he believed was a failed mission. He did not hesitate. 2 sharp gunshots rang out. The Archduke and his wife collapsed, and with them fell the final match into Europe's powder keg. The Sarajevo assassination was not merely a murder, it was the opening act of a slaughter that would last more than 4 years. Drawing 33 nations into its grip and affecting over 1.5 billion people worldwide. The numbers alone speak to its savagery. More than 70 million soldiers were mobilized, yet 8.5 million never returned home. Alongside them, 13 million innocent civilians perished. In truth, long before those shots echoed through Sarajevo, the great powers Britain, Germany, France, and Russia had been circling one another, locked in fierce competition for colonies and markets, nurturing tensions beyond repair. The world at that time was like a vast chessboard, where every piece was merely waiting for an excuse to strike. The gunshots in Sarajevo were the final spark that set the entire old continent ablaze. Welcome to Travel Story. If you find our perspective compelling, please support us by subscribing to the channel. And if you disagree with my viewpoint, leave your thoughts in the comments below, but only if you're truly serious about the discussion. But don't make the mistake of believing that a single bullet fired by a 17-year-old boy was powerful enough on its own to bring down an ancient civilization. That shot was merely the final drop, the perfect excuse that allowed underground tensions, simmering for decades, to explode into a catastrophic flood. To understand why the entire world tore itself apart so violently, we must turn back the clock and look at a Europe riddled with deep fractures. At that time, almost every pair of neighboring states harbored bitter grudges against one another. Yet the most decisive and dangerous rivalries were those between Britain and Germany, France and Germany, and the three-way confrontation among Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary. From the 1870s onward, the old imperial powers Britain, France, and Russia had raced to carve up nearly the entire world into colonies, extracting resources wherever they could. By the end of the 19th century, the global map was already filled with their colors. Then, at the heart of Europe, a new industrial beast rose: Germany. Fueled by the Second Industrial Revolution, German industrial output exploded and even surpassed Britain's. But the Germans soon realized, bitterly, that the most lucrative markets and richest sources of raw materials were already monopolized by Britain. Germany wanted a redistribution of the world's spoils. It wanted supremacy, and that ambition posed a direct threat to the wealth and status of the long-entrenched elites in London and Paris. Meanwhile, the hostility between France and Germany carried a far more personal and humiliating tone. After the disastrous defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, France not only lost its dominance in Western Europe, but was also forced to endure the ultimate insult, King Wilhelm I of Prussia being crowned German emperor inside France's own glittering palace of Versailles. The French never forgot the pain of losing Alsace and Lorraine. The desire for revenge burned fiercely in every generation of French officers. To the east, another fuse was smoldering the Balkan Peninsula, often called the powder keg of Europe. This region was a strategic crossroads between Asia, Europe, and Africa. Russia, bound by Slavic identity, sought to unite Slavic peoples under its protection in order to control the vital Black Sea Straits. Austria-Hungary, on the other hand, feared that a Russian-backed Slavic state emerging on its border would block its path of eastward expansion. When Germany chose to stand firmly behind Austria-Hungary in this struggle, it effectively pushed Russia into direct confrontation. In this gunpowder-saturated atmosphere, nations began searching for allies under a simple rule: the enemy of my enemy is my friend. In 1879, Germany and Austria-Hungary secretly signed a military alliance. Germany then cleverly exploited tensions between Italy and France over colonial disputes in Tunisia to draw Italy into its orbit. By 1882, the Triple Alliance Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy was officially formed with Germany as its central pillar. In response, France and Russia set aside their political differences and joined forces in 1892, as Anglo-German rivalry grew irreconcilable. Britain abandoned its long-standing policy of isolation, signing agreements with France in 1904 and with Russia in 1907. Two massive military blocs now stood face-to-face across Europe's borders, glaring at one another. Europe plunged into the most frenzied arms race in its history. Military budgets skyrocketed. Armies and navies expanded to unprecedented sizes. New instruments of mass-killing armored vehicles, tanks, aircraft, heavy machine guns, and powerful artillery appeared one after another. Most dramatic of all was the naval race between Britain and Germany. Britain declared that for every German warship built, it would build two of its own to maintain absolute dominance. By 1914, the Royal Navy possessed more than 600 warships, while Germany followed closely with nearly 400. Behind lofty declarations of peace and disarmament, generals and their headquarters quietly perfected devastating war plans. Germany prepared the ambitious Schlieffen Plan to defeat France within 6 weeks before turning east against Russia. France devised Plan 17 to reclaim Alsace-Lorraine. Russia prepared Plan 19 to contain Germany and Austria-Hungary. Britain stood ready to enforce a suffocating naval blockade. All of these preparations waited for a single spark, and that spark was prepared in Serbia. On June 28, 1914, a date Serbs regarded as a national day of mourning marking their historic defeat by the Ottomans, the Austro-Hungarian heir chose to visit Sarajevo. Two Slavic nationalists yearning to break free from Austro-Hungarian rule and unite with a greater Serbia. This was an act of extreme provocation. A secret organization known as the Black Hand had already formed, committed to achieving independence through violence. Although the Serbian government warned of assassination risks, Archduke Ferdinand ignored them. He wished to spend the 14th anniversary of his wedding in Sarajevo. And the rest, as we know, was a tragedy that gave birth to all others. When news of the Archduke's death spread, it did not immediately provoke global outrage. Instability in the Balkans had become almost routine. But behind the scenes, the great powers began a deadly game. Austria-Hungary sought to crush Serbia and turned to Germany for support. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany initially intended only to intimidate Russia, but his overconfidence pushed the world past the point of no return. Backed by Germany, Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum so humiliating that no sovereign nation could fully accept it. Even though Serbia conceded nearly everything, Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, 1914. Within days, a horrifying domino effect unfolded. Russia mobilized to defend its Slavic brother. Germany declared war on Russia, then on France. When German troops marched through neutral Belgium to execute their lightning war plan, Britain declared war on Germany to uphold international treaties. Europe went up in flames and a war once expected to end before the leaves fell would instead drag on for 4 long years, drowned in blood and mud. Imagine having exactly 42 days to decide the fate of an entire empire. No more, no less. That was the reckless gamble Germany's top military commanders placed in the summer of 1914. As trains packed with soldiers began to roll across the continent, much of Europe still clung to the illusion of a short, glorious war where young men would be home before the autumn leaves fell. What they did not realize was that they were charging headlong into a black hole of history, where even the most brilliant plans would be crushed beneath the wheels of brutal reality. At the heart of Germany's strategy lay the Schlieffen Plan, the very soul of its war doctrine. German leaders understood one harsh truth: they could not win a war on 2 fronts against both Russia and France. Their only hope was a lightning-fast iron punch knocked France out within 6 weeks, before the slow-moving Russian bear could fully awaken and mobilize its armies along the eastern border. According to German calculations, Russia's outdated railway network would require 6 to 8 weeks to assemble its forces. That window was pure gold. Germany would throw everything westward, sweep aside France, and then turn back to face Russia at its leisure. But to make that punch truly decisive, Germany chose a path soaked in risk. They decided to march through Belgium, a neutral nation. On August 2, 1914, Germany issued an arrogant ultimatum demanding free passage for its troops. When Belgium refused, German forces invaded on August 4th without hesitation. That single act did more than provoke Belgian resistance. It awakened a giant. Bound by international treaties to protect Belgian neutrality, Britain declared war on Germany. What might have remained a continental conflict now exploded into a truly global war. German planners expected Belgium's fortresses to collapse within 2 days. Reality struck hard. The Belgian army, though small, fought with astonishing determination. At the fortress of Liege, they delayed the German advance for 10 full days. To break the deadlock, Germany was forced to deploy its monstrous siege guns Big Berthold to smash the defenses into rubble. 10 days may sound insignificant, but those 10 days were priceless. They gave Britain and France the time they needed to mobilize and deploy, shattering the Schlieffen Plan's timetable, which had been calculated down to the hour. Meanwhile, France was consumed by its own obsession. Plan 17, still humiliated by its defeat in 1870. French commanders hurled their armies toward Alsace and Lorraine in a desperate bid to reclaim lost territory. They nearly walked straight into a German, trap-thinly held border defenses meant to lure French forces forward, while Germany's main army swept down from the north to encircle them. But once again, fate intervened through human error. In the east, Russia moved far faster than anyone had anticipated. Russian armies surged into East Prussia before Germany could finish off France. Panic rippled through Berlin at the thought of enemy troops on German soil. And then came a fatal decision. Germany's chief of staff, Moltke, made a catastrophic mistake. He pulled 9 divisions from the advancing Western Front and sent them east to contain the Russians. That single decision fatally weakened Germany's right wing at the worst possible moment. By the time German troops stood less than 70 kilometers from Paris, they were exhausted, overstretched, and dangerously thin. French commander Joseph Joffre seized this once-in-a-century opportunity. From September 5th to September 12th, along the Marne River, France threw everything it had into the fight, so desperate that Parisian taxis were famously commandeered to rush soldiers to the front. The Battle of the Marne became a slaughterhouse. More than 250,000 German soldiers were killed or wounded. The dream of a quick victory died there in the mud and blood of northern France. Unable to destroy each other in mobile warfare, Both sides dug in literally. Shallow foxholes became trenches. Trenches became fortified lines, until a massive system of earthworks stretched more than 435 kilometers, from the North Sea all the way to the Swiss border. This was the moment World War I revealed its true face. Trench warfare, gone were heroic marches across open fields. Soldiers now lived like buried animals in damp, filthy trenches filled with mud, rats, disease, and decaying bodies. Between the opposing lines lay no man's land. A death strip where any head raised above the parapet could be cut down instantly by machine gun fire. While the Western Front descended into suffocating stalemate, the East told a different story. Despite Russia's rapid advance, it collided with two formidable commanders, Hindenburg and Ludendorff. At Tannenberg and the Mazurian Lakes, German forces achieved crushing victories, annihilating hundreds of thousands of Russian troops and eliminating the immediate threat to German territory. These triumphs secured Germany's position in the East, but they could not compensate for the deadlock in the West. By the end of 1914, all illusions of a short war had vanished. Every nation now understood the truth. This would be a war of exhaustion, draining blood, steel, and souls to the very end. Every meter of ground gained demanded thousands of lives. The entry of the Ottoman Empire into the war on the side of the Central Powers in late October 1914 only widened the inferno, severing key supply routes of the Allied powers through the Turkish Straits. The world was now locked inside a prolonged nightmare, one where men no longer fought for ideals, glory, or honor, but simply to survive one more day inside trenches filled with blood, mud, and tears. These trenches would not merely serve as shelters. They would become the mass grave of an entire generation of European youth, marking the beginning of a war with no escape. One that would grind on relentlessly for 4 long years to come. If there were ever a place on earth that could be called a gateway straight into hell, it would be Verdun in 1916. Imagine standing in a landscape where every single hour, up to 100,000 artillery shells rain down from the sky. The ground is no longer earth, has become a grotesque slurry of mud, twisted steel, and shattered human remains. But before we descend into the very peak of horror at Verdun, we need to step back to 1915, the year the war began to mutate into a brutal contest of endurance. A grim competition over who would collapse first. As 1915 dawned, the romance of marching armies vanished completely. In its place stood a merciless reality. Britain, wielding the overwhelming power of its navy, imposed a total blockade on Germany's sea routes. Food supplies and raw materials were cut off with chilling intent to starve an entire nation into submission. Germany refused to sit idle. It retaliated with a strategy just as ruthless, unrestricted submarine warfare. German U-boats, like phantoms beneath the ocean, began hunting any vessel bound for Britain. Then, in May 1915, disaster struck. A passenger ship carrying American civilians was sunk, killing hundreds. The outrage was immediate and explosive, forced by global fury. Germany temporarily halted attacks on passenger vessels, but the seed of American intervention had already been planted. That same year saw a dramatic political betrayal. Italy, once a member of the Central Powers, turned its back on its former allies. Seduced by British promises of Austrian territory, Italy switched sides. Reality, however, proved far harsher than diplomacy. Italian forces launched dozens of offensives against Austria-Hungary, all ending in disastrous failure, like smashing eggs against stone. On the Eastern Front, Germany shifted strategy entirely, focusing on crushing a weakened Russia. The Russian army, filled with barely trained recruits and crippled by a collapsing logistics system, could not withstand the combined German-Austrian hammer. Warsaw fell. Then Lithuania. Russia was dragged deeper into a spiraling national crisis. Yet all of this was merely a prelude to 1916, the year of the war's greatest slaughterhouses. Germany's commander, Falkenhayn, devised a plan of chilling calculation at Verdun. He did not aim to seize territory. Sole objective was to bleed the French army dry. Verdun was chosen precisely because it was sacred to French national pride, the symbolic key to Paris itself. Falkenhayn believed the French would defend it to the last man, and he intended to turn Verdun into a vast meat grinder, draining France of its manpower. On February 21, 1916, the firestorm began. With an artillery barrage unlike anything seen before, German guns reduced France's fortified defenses to dust in moments. Then came a new terror: flamethrowers, sweeping through trenches and burning alive those who had survived the shelling. France teetered on the edge of collapse. In that darkest hour, General Pétain emerged. He engineered a logistical miracle, mobilizing nearly 4,000 trucks to create a lifeline known as the Sacred Road, funneling hundreds of thousands of soldiers and tens of thousands of tons of supplies to the front in just 1 week. Pétain imposed iron discipline. Soldiers would either die advancing or be executed by their own side for retreating. Verdun ceased to be a battle. It became a test of raw human will and endurance amid total devastation. To relieve the pressure on Verdun, the Anglo-French forces launched the Battle of the Somme in June 1916, hoping to force Germany to divert troops. The British unleashed a colossal bombardment, shelling German positions non-stop for 7 days and nights. Commanders believed nothing could possibly survive. They were wrong. When British troops went over the top, they were met by scything machine gun fire pouring from intact German bunkers. On the very first day alone, Britain suffered 60,000 casualties. The Somme also marked a grim milestone: the battlefield debut of the first steel monster tanks. Though slow and unreliable, their appearance delivered a profound psychological shock to German soldiers. While the land shook under artillery fire, titans clashed at sea. At Jutland, the largest naval battle of the war erupted as hundreds of steel warships confronted one another head-on. Germany inflicted heavier losses, but failed to break Britain's blockade. Control of the seas remained firmly in British hands, continuing to strangle Germany's economy day by day. On the Eastern Front, as the Allies struggled elsewhere, Russia delivered a stunning surprise. General Brusilov abandoned traditional tactics and launched simultaneous attacks along multiple points of the Austro-Hungarian line. The defenders could not determine where the main blow would fall. Russian forces smashed through the front, capturing hundreds of thousands of prisoners and pushing Austria-Hungary to the brink of total collapse. This success forced Germany to pull 13 elite divisions out of the hell of Verdun to save its ally in the east. Finally, after 10 relentless months of fighting, French forces pushed the Germans back from Verdun in December 1916. But the victory came at an almost unimaginable cost. Nearly 1 million lives were swallowed by the battlefield. More than 40 million artillery shells were fired, turning the region into an anonymous graveyard. After 2 years of war by attrition, the world was exhausted. Food shortages spread, economies crumbled. Social tensions ignited within the great powers themselves. Nowhere was this more dangerous than in Russia, where cold, hunger, and overwhelming grief pushed the population to the very limits of endurance, setting the stage for a seismic upheaval that would reshape the world map forever. Have you ever wondered whether a single snowstorm could bring down a mighty empire that had stood for more than 3 centuries? In early 1917, in Petrograd, bone-piercing cold and towering walls of snow blocked every road, completely severing food supplies and plunging millions into extreme hunger. While Tsar Nicholas II remained absorbed at the front, commanding his armies, a political earthquake erupted in the capital, ending 304 years of Romanov rule in just 7 days. This was not merely the fall of a royal family, but the opening act of a chain reaction so powerful it would reshape the entire course of the global war. The year 1917 began with the cold breath of collapse. Russia had become a machine worn down to its last bolts after 3 years of war. The government was dominated by corrupt bureaucratic factions, incapable of offering any solution to ease the suffering of the people. Cries for bread and peace echoed through the streets of Petrograd. On March 8th, the February Revolution erupted. Tens of thousands of workers went on strike, and most critically, the soldiers sent to suppress the crowds turned their rifles around and joined the people. Under irresistible pressure, the Tsar was forced to abdicate on March 15th. Russia slipped into a strange state of dual power, governed simultaneously by the provisional government and the Soviets, creating deep chaos and division over whether the war should continue. While Russia descended into turmoil, Germany, on the opposite side of the battlefield, was making a final gamble to reverse its fortunes. After the failure at Verdun, German commanders chose to resume unrestricted submarine warfare. They declared that any ship heading toward Allied ports would be sunk. It was a desperate strike aimed directly at the lifelines of Britain and France. But Germany miscalculated a fatal move. Repeated attacks on American merchant ships struck both the pride and economic interests of Washington. The United States was not only a vast trading partner, but also the largest creditor of the Allied powers. If Britain and France fell, billions of American dollars would vanish. Thus, on April 6, 1917, the United States officially declared war on Germany. The entry of the American giant with its seemingly limitless financial and human resources was effectively a death sentence for the Central European empires. Yet before American troops could arrive in Europe, the Allies faced a severe crisis of confidence on the Western Front. French General Nivelle unveiled an ambitious offensive, promising to end the war within 48 hours with minimal losses. French soldiers believed him and marched into battle with their last reserve of optimism. Reality, however, was catastrophic. Because Nivelle had publicized his plans so openly, the Germans were fully prepared, having constructed an extremely deep and layered defensive system. When the offensive began on April 16th, French forces were shredded by German machine gun fire. The losses were even worse than at Verdun. Faith collapsed. Nearly half of the French army mutinied, refusing orders to march into certain death. France had no choice but to replace Nivelle with the hero of Verdun, General Pétain, to calm the troops and restore discipline. From that moment, France lost all capacity for major offensives and was forced into a defensive posture. The burden of the war now fell heavily on Britain's shoulders. To relieve pressure on France, British forces launched costly and bloody campaigns. At Messines, they achieved a remarkable military feat by digging more than 5 kilometers of tunnels beneath German positions and packing them with 4 tons of explosives. The earth-shattering blast tore apart German defenses, allowing the British to seize key high ground. But that hope was quickly smothered in the mud of Passchendaele. Torrential rains turned the battlefield into a vast swamp where soldiers and horses alike could be swallowed whole by the mire. After 3 months of savage fighting, the British advanced just 5 kilometers at the cost of unimaginable casualties. While the Western Front stagnated in mud and blood, Russia in the east reached its breaking point. The Russian Provisional Government, despite widespread anti-war sentiment, launched the Kerensky Offensive in June in a last attempt to satisfy its Western allies. But the Russian army had lost all will to fight. When met with fierce German counterattacks, Russian units disintegrated and fled en masse. This failure erased the last shred of credibility held by the Provisional Government. Seizing the moment, Lenin and the Bolsheviks unleashed slogans that resonated deeply with a suffering population. On November 7, 1917, the October Revolution erupted, overthrowing the Provisional Government and establishing the world's first Soviet state. One of the new regime's first priorities was to pull Russia out of the war at any cost. After 3 months of tense negotiations under relentless German military pressure, Soviet Russia signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk on March 3, 1918. It was a bitter peace. Russia surrendered nearly 1 million square kilometers of territory, including some of its richest and most populous regions. Yet for many Russians, this was the price paid to preserve the revolution. Elsewhere, China also formally joined the Allied cause, sending tens of thousands of laborers and supplies to Europe, helping to accelerate the war's eventual conclusion. Russia's withdrawal was an invaluable gift to Germany. For the first time in years, it escaped the trap of fighting on two fronts. Germany immediately redeployed dozens of elite divisions from the east to the west, preparing for one final decisive blow before American forces could arrive in overwhelming numbers. The world held its breath. A race against time had begun. Could Germany defeat Britain and France before the immense power of the United States flooded into Europe? The year 1917 closed under a dark and ominous sky. Russia retreated into the shadows of civil war, while the Western Front braced itself for the most devastating firestorm yet to come. Have you ever wondered what a soldier might have felt at exactly 11 a.m. on November 11, 1918? After more than 1,500 days drowned in the roar of artillery and the choking stench of gunpowder, the world suddenly fell into a silence so profound it felt terrifying. This was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of a world that had just shattered. The year 1918, the final year of the Great War, opened with the labored breath of a beast driven into a corner. With Russia gone from the fight, Germany threw every last ounce of strength into a final all-or-nothing gamble. The spring offensive, an attempt to decide the fate of Europe before it was too late. On March 21, 1918, Germany unleashed 192 divisions against 178 Anglo-French divisions. This time, they abandoned outdated frontal assaults and instead deployed elite stormtrooper units, coordinating multiple weapon systems to infiltrate and shatter enemy lines in moments. Within a single week, they advanced 65 kilometers, closing to within just 30 kilometers of Paris. Once again, the French capital trembled under the range of German guns. But this was also the moment the United States entered the war in full force. General Pershing and waves of energetic American soldiers injected new life into the Allied ranks. In the forests of Belleau Wood, U.S. troops fought with such ferocity and courage that they erased European doubts about American combat ability and revived the shattered morale of the Allies. America's arrival was not merely a boost in manpower, it was a crushing psychological blow to Germany. While the Allies now drew on endless supplies and reinforcements from across the Atlantic, Germany was exhausted to the bone. Under the unified command of Marshal Foch, the Allies won a decisive victory at the Second Battle of the Marne in August, marking the complete end of Germany's offensive capacity. From that point on, the 100 Days Offensive began. Supported by tanks and aircraft, Allied forces surged forward like a tidal wave, smashing through the formidable Hindenburg Line by the end of September. The domino effect now reversed beyond control. Germany's allies fell one by one like autumn leaves. Bulgaria surrendered in September. The Ottoman Empire followed in October. And in early November, the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, no longer able to sustain large-scale military operations. Germany now stood alone, an isolated island in a sea of fire. Inside Germany itself, rage fueled by hunger and a senseless war reached its breaking point. Revolution erupted in Berlin. Soldiers mutinied and seized key institutions, forcing Kaiser Wilhelm II to abdicate and flee to the Netherlands on November 9th. The German Empire collapsed, replaced by a new Republican government born amid chaos and exhaustion. At 5 a.m. on November 11, 1918, inside a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne, an armistice was signed between German representatives and Marshal Foch. 6 hours later, at exactly 11 a.m., the guns, finally, fell silent across all fronts. World War I was over. But the scars it left behind would never fade. In early 1919, the Paris Peace Conference convened at the Palace of Versailles, bringing together representatives from 27 nations to redraw the world. The three most powerful figures at the table: U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, and French Prime Minister Georges Clément-Ceausescu, together each driven by sharply conflicting ambitions. France wanted Germany crushed forever. Britain sought to preserve a balance of power to restrain France. And the United States aimed to establish a new world order under its leadership. The result was the Treaty of Versailles, merciless sentence imposed on the defeated. Germany was stripped of all its colonies, lost 1/8 of its territory and 1/10 of its population. Its army was limited to just 100,000 men, and it was burdened with an enormous war reparations bill of 132 billion marks. This humiliation and exploitation did not create lasting peace. Instead of healing wounds, it planted deeper seeds of resentment in the hearts of the German people. Ancient empires, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, and the Russian vanished forever from the map, replaced by fragile new nations. World War I did not end with true reconciliation, but with a fragile pause that would last only 20 years. And from the very ruins of Versailles, a storm far more devastating would one day rise again. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this video. I will read and respond to all your comments just to make sure they come from a place of genuine, constructive engagement.